you are in related fields, not necessarily architecture, but they're all interrelated because architects rely on the people in the construction industry to get their projects built. So the definition of architecture is the art or practice of designing and constructing buildings. People use the term architecture now for a lot of different things that have nothing to do with buildings. You know, if you've even heard political architecture, anything that's putting together ideas. The term architecture comes from the Greek, which is architecton, which is chief, and then builder. So chief builder is where the name architecture comes from. Architectural works are often seen as cultural symbols. You can even think of what I have on as my little photo on my icon today, the Eiffel Tower. Everybody instantly knows that means Paris, France, right? We see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, we know Italy. If we see the Statue of Liberty, we know the United States. So it can identify cultures and societies, and a lot of societies really pride themselves on their architectural history. So here's some famous buildings. We've got, I just mentioned the Statue of Liberty and the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I don't know how I knew to do that. This is some kind of Roman monument. It might be the Parthenon. Here's a Japanese pagoda. This is a building in England. And then here's a bridge. A lot of bridge art is great architecture, a lot of bridge work. So I'm going to show you some buildings that you should know. There's certain buildings that you should leave this class knowing what they are. And this is, the first one is the Roman Colosseum, a very famous building. This is where they used to have gladiator fights and put people out to lions. And it was the equivalent of our football games, I guess, today, where people come and watch, you know, these sporting events. It was all clad in white marble originally, and it has been recently restored, maybe about 4 years ago, by a wealthy man in Italy. So the Roman Colosseum is something you should know, the repetitive arches going through here. Another building that you should know is the Taj Mahal from India. Excuse me. This was built for one of the kings of Rajasthan for his wife who died, and this is all white marble, and there was supposed to be a black marble one at the opposite end of the pool so they would reflect and stare at each other through eternity. Well, his son imprisoned Dad and never built the black monument to Dad, so just this, the Taj Mahal is standing there. Absolutely beautiful. I was fortunate enough to go to India several years ago and got to see the Taj Mahal, and it's stunning. Perfect symmetry too, and there's this great reflecting pool. You can sit at the end and get your reflection in front of the Taj. Well worth seeing if you're ever in that area of the world. The Imperial Palace in Kyoto. We also saw this a few years ago. My son was living in Japan. This is traditional Japanese architecture, the pagoda-like roofs. We'll see some other gates, Japanese pagoda gates. Milwaukee Art Museum. I hope somebody has been up to the Milwaukee Art Museum. Obviously in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This was done by a Spanish architect named Santiago Calatrava, and it is one of my favorite buildings in the United States, and that's saying a lot. These right here are wings that open up. So at night they close down. They're called brise de soleil. They close down, and there's a glass skylights in here, so they close down on top of the glass at night, and then they have a mechanical system that opens them up during the day. If it's windy, they won't open it up, but you can go up to Milwaukee Art Museum at 10 o'clock when the museum opens. They open the wings, and then they repeat the process at noon, you know, weather dependent. And then this tieback is holding the bridge that goes from the parking lot over to the museum. It looks like a boat or a bird taking flight, and Lake Michigan is right out here. Stunningly beautiful building. So Milwaukee Art Museum had an original building by a very famous architect named Saarinen, and but it was kind of, I don't know if you know what brutalist architecture is, but it was not real well known, and they hired Santiago Calatrava, I think almost 20 years ago now, to build this, to design and build this building. And they went from a little know-nothing art museum to one of a very renowned art museum. And because of the building, they get these major exhibits there now that they wouldn't have gotten before. So if we, when we're out of COVID, this is a favorite trip for the Architecture Club. Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. This is in Bear Run, Pennsylvania, about 2 hours outside of Pittsburgh. It was a summer home for the Kaufmans, and you can tour this home. Right now they're only doing outside tours, but stunningly beautiful, built over a waterfall. I've been there 2 or 3 times, maybe 3 times. It's really, really beautiful. You'll learn through this course that Frank Lloyd Wright is one of my favorite architects. Eiffel Tower. This was designed by Gustav Eiffel, not really designed by him, but he was the person who got it built, and it was for the World's Fair in 1889, I believe. And it was in Paris, and they built this, and the Parisians hated it. Couldn't wait for it to fall down. Eiffel spent his whole life trying to save it and make sure that nobody tore it down, and now it's iconic. And if you don't know what we did in contrast, do anybody know what we did for the World's Fair in 1893 to top the Eiffel Tower? Because this was such a big hit. Any clues? You ever been to Navy Pier?
So,
Ferris wheel. And the one at Navy Pier is smaller than, much smaller than the one that they had for the Columbian Exposition. So we built we had the Ferris wheel built for ours. Here's Chartres Cathedral. This is about 2 hours by train outside of Paris. Gorgeous, gorgeous stained glass in this. I was fortunate to live in France for a year, and then I've been back a couple times, so seen Chartres a couple times. It's got these flying buttresses on it. So this is one you should know. So who knows what famous cathedral in France burned? Would it be last year?
oh,
Anybody know?
It was the what's the name of that? I want to say the
It was Notre Dame,
no.
and we're not sure if it was arson or not, but Notre Dame burned almost to the ground. And we had been in Paris that summer, and I made my husband go see it. He was like, "Oh, we've been there," and luckily we did, because we'll never see it again. It won't be finished in our lifetime. So architecture also has regionalism to it. That means it responds to local climates, uses local materials, and uses local customs and traditions. It used to be that you could tell where a house was by how it looked, because it matched the environment and the materials available there. So a classic example is an igloo. That's not going to be built anyplace else. You see this, you know it's in Alaska, right? And it's responding to the environment, it's using local materials and the culture in it. An adobe home in the Southwest is also very cultural and regional. These thick adobe walls are using the mud that's available in right outside their doorstep. The walls are thick, and there's often interior courtyards. So the walls are thick, so it keeps the hot sun out during the day, but it cools down quite a bit at night in the desert, and so it will re-radiate those walls back to the inside and keep the inside warmer at night. So these are both passive houses. The igloo is actually very warm on the inside. You wouldn't think so with being made out of snow, but it's nice and toasty inside. And this one keeps you cool during the day and a little bit warmer at night when it cools down. This is a salt box house in the East Coast. Very steep pitched roofs because they get lots of snow. and so you want to keep the snow off. And this is also one that would have been added on to. The original one probably was just this front portion, and the back part was added on. But the sawbox houses have these really steep pitched roofs, and that's classic New England. And here's a traditional Japanese house. You wouldn't confuse this with being in any other country because it has all the characteristics of a Japanese house, the paper walls and the wood structure and multi-layered wood roof or thatch roof often. But here's a contemporary house, anywhere USA. So we've gotten to the point where our houses don't adapt to our local climates, our local cultures, our local traditions, or our local building materials. We can go to suburbia anywhere in the US and the houses all look the same. And if you're in sustainability, Dan will talk about why that's a problem, because it's not addressing the environmental needs of that area. So here's Colonial House Anywhere USA. You can find this virtually in every town across the United States. It's a variation on the houses in New England, and but people like this, and so they build it irregardless of where it is or how it's oriented. Builders like building the same house over and over. So what do architects do? They design and plan structures. Hopefully they're aesthetically pleasing. There are some architects whose structures are less than aesthetically pleasing. They work with safety, so they follow certain codes and zoning. And if it's a public building, they work with accessibility. In a private residence, you don't have to worry about this, but in a public building, you have to make sure that your building is accessible to any people with just any type of disabilities. So they design all these, and then they turn their ideas into reality. And an architect or a construction technology person or a construction manager will manage the building project. Large projects will have both a design architect and a project manager architect, and then there will be a construction manager overseeing it. And architects and contractors and construction people continue their education throughout their career. It's constantly changing, the codes are changing, the needs are changing, the materials are changing. When I started architecture school, you weren't drawing on the computer, and now for projects, that's mainly what you're doing, is drawing on the computer. So here's a set of architectural blueprints. This is for, looks like it's an apartment building, but this is typically what you'd have for blueprints. So architects used to draw. Remember I showed you that T-square? So you're going to be using a T-square for the class this year to do your projects at home. And you're going to find a wooden surface, and it can be just a piece of plywood. It just needs to have a smooth top. And you're going to use the triangle on top of it, and you're going to draw your drawings on this, on your board. And we'll talk about different ways to make that work better than others. This person's drawing Santa Claus, but this is a traditional old architecture table, which still works perfectly fine, and we're going back to in the time of COVID. When you come to the studio, you'll see these parallel rules that we have, and they're on a continuous wire ring, and they're easier to use than a T-square. They hold the drawings in place better, and then so you do all your horizontal lines with the T-square or the parallel rule, and you do all your vertical lines with the triangle resting on top of that T-square or parallel rule, so that it's a perfect 90 degrees difference. And then if you continue in the program with us, and some of you are already starting with AutoCAD, you'll do AutoCAD and Revit, and you'll be translating your ideas onto the computer. I always get somebody in my class who says, why did we have to learn to draw? Everybody's doing things on the computer. I didn't like that part of it. But drawing is essential. When you're drawing on the computer, you're less creative. Because you're not free to sketch paper out really quick. You're also not to scale. You only get scale when you print from the computer. So when you're drawing by hand, you're drawing to scale. So we're going to learn how to draw by hand, and you will use it in your career. This is the architecture scale that we just talked about. And then that looks like a repeat. Just what is an architect is similar to what we just talked about. And I think that's the end of my slides. So for Monday, you're going to read, you're not going to purchase a sketchbook. We're not doing that in this class. You're going to read The Life of an Architect. And I posted it on Blackboard, and I'll show you where that is. And then this is a different assignment. So let me show you where that is on Blackboard.